Palestinian struggle has continued tirelessly for years. Time and again, we've seen Israel ramp up pressure on the international community, attack innocent Palestinians, and never pay for the crimes that it commits. The current Israeli onslaught against Palestinians has shocked the world. But what's more horrifying is the fact that Israel is being supported by world powers, and people like US President Joe Biden, who has approved arms sales to Israel worth in excess of $700 million. Palestinians expect concrete steps from the international community to halt Israeli aggression in occupied Palestinian territories, while Turkish decision-makers have reiterated Turkey's strong support for the Palestinian cause at every opportunity. At this point, while welcoming all the international condemnations of Israel's barbarity and the emotional support for Palestinians on social media and elsewhere, this is not the only thing that Palestinians require. Since over 75,000 people have been displaced and women and children have been severely affected by the continuing Israeli airstrikes, Palestinians demand effective actions against the Israeli crimes.
أكثر مكان بحبه بالدار مطبخي، مش لأنه طبخي ذكي، لا، بس لأنه هون بنجمع أكثر إشي، نطبخ، ناكل، نحكي، يعني المطبخ عنا زي ما تقولوا بحر بالحب.
المكان اللي فيه بالبيت غرفتي، لأن ماما وبابا عملوا لي بيت للألعاب فيه. أنا كمان بس أكبر بدي أكون زي ماما وأعمل بيت زي لأولادي.
أكثر إشي بحبه بهالدار هاي الشجرة. هاي الشجرة زرعها سيدي الله يرحمه أول ما عمر الدار، وكان يحبها ويدير باله عليها كأنها حدا من أولاده. وهلا زي ما أنتم شايفين قاعدين تحتها إحنا والعيلة. ليش؟
Over 1,000 Palestinians have been injured and hundreds have been killed during daily attacks by Israeli forces on the Gaza Strip. Our following infographic gives an overview of the developments. Israeli airstrikes have not only killed innocent Palestinians during the bloodshed in Gaza, but have also destroyed the besieged enclave's only coronavirus laboratory and a building which housed foreign and domestic news agencies.
An Israeli airstrike destroyed a prominent building in Gaza City that housed international media outlets. Hours later, the enclave's only COVID-19 laboratory was no longer able to conduct tests following a devastating Israeli airstrike. The Israeli airstrike, which destroyed the media center building in Gaza, housed media outlets including the Associated Press, New York Times, and ALJAZZAR. The Al-Jalaa building in Gaza is the third high-rise building housing media offices to be razed to the ground. Over 30 media offices have been wiped out in these 2 weeks.
There is no immunity at all, and wherever you go you feel targeted. After our office was bombed, we started working in inappropriate places, working on the streets and roads. More than 30 media offices were bombed. Imagine 30 offices, meaning 30 press institutions. These institutions were made of dozens of journalists. They do not even have an office now in which to sit and follow the news.
Journalists and media organizations have lost their equipment and archives, making it difficult to continue covering Israel's war crimes.
Our office was in ALJAZZAR building. We were surprised by the rapid evacuation of the tower. Of course, our office was destroyed. The targeting is noticeably clear to journalists. We felt that the targeting was deliberate for us.
The destruction of the Al-Rimal clinic in Gaza has proven to be even more costlier. It has offices of the Health Ministry and the only COVID-19 laboratory in the Gaza Strip. Now, all of that has gone.
Many Ministry of Health services ceased to exist, including the central laboratory that provides a group of tests and the COVID-19 tests. Today, it has stopped completely. COVID-19 vaccinations and remote medical consultation teams have also been stopped.
Israel's blatant targeting of Gaza's health center has only increased the suffering of Palestinians, especially as a third wave of the coronavirus takes its toll on the Strip. The suffering can only be felt inside Gaza's borders, since world leaders have chosen to stay silent as Israel systematically attacks Palestinians' media organizations. Israel is continuing to destroy residential and media housing buildings, trying its best to stop the true story about its aggression against Palestinians from reaching the world. For A News, Bahad-Din Al-Ghul, Gaza, Palestine.
And I'm now joined live from Beirut in Lebanon by Khaled Khalomi, who's a member of the Arab and Islamic Relations in Hamas. Mr. Khalomi, thank you for joining me today here on The Edge. We've been watching, it's the 11th day now of Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, and it seems that we've come to a point where there is talk of some form of ceasefire. Do you anticipate that this really is on the cards, or is Benjamin Netanyahu going to do what he says to carry on until he's destroyed everything?
Thank you, Andy, for having me at your program, and I would like to greet your audience. Actually, you have seen the devastating impact of the Israeli offensive on our innocent people in Gaza. And you have shown in your report a very comprehensive view about those crimes against humanity and crimes and war crimes, I would say, which has been perpetrated by the Israeli army against our innocent people. The infants, the kids, the residential areas. Talking about Netanyahu, he is the one who has started this, who has instigated this offensive against us when he pushed and encouraged the extremist settlers to go and push into Al-Aqsa Mosque, when he sent his own army and his police to displace our people from Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Al-Quds. This continuous crime of occupation for the last 73 years. Every time the international community is not ready to understand that we are only defending ourselves. Any action of resistance today in all over Palestine, whether it is militarily, whether it is peaceful rallies, it is a simple reaction against the action of the occupation, which has continued for the last 73 years. But unfortunately, those even civilian rallies, look what is happening in West Bank, for example. Now we are having 17 martyrs who are marching peacefully, non-militarily, civilian individuals in the street, which they have been treated by the Israeli regime, criminal regime, who is continuously perpetrating these crimes against humanity in all over Palestine. Look at our people in the area occupied in 1948. They are simply so-called Israeli citizens, but they are discriminated. They have no right even to protest peacefully and raise their voice to justify to look for the justice for our Palestinian, their Palestinian brethren all over Palestine. What is the meaning of ceasefire if we don't have any guarantee that Netanyahu and his criminal army will repeat those crimes and again and again? This international community, as you have beautifully said in your report, Joe Biden, what is the difference between Joe Biden as Democrat or President Trump, Republican? Both of them, they have continued the same policies against our people. They are really in the side of our enemy. They are really trenched, backing the enemy who is committing those crimes against humanity. They have even prevented a media statement to be released by the Security Council to be fair enough to talk about those crimes. For the last 73 years, America has used the right of veto for 45 times in favor of Israel. To expect something called ceasefire, for the notion of stopping fire, maybe yes, we will conclude something if the enemy abide by the condition of the Palestinian people, if the enemy stop its atrocities against our innocent people. But on the other hand, even if we have concluded this ceasefire, is the international community going to see really that what has happened in Gaza are crimes against humanity, are war crimes, and they will be ready to punish the one who has committed those crimes against our people? The answer, I don't know. I still doubt whether the international community is fair enough to justify, to give justice for our people in Palestine.
So, as you quite rightly say, the ceasefire in itself isn't going to resolve the situation. In fact, as was pointed out at the UNGA meeting earlier today, just a few hours ago, by the President Volkan Bozkır, it does go back the full 73 years. The resolutions that have been passed already in the UNGA which haven't been fulfilled, and of course the recent tensions sparked by the evictions in Sheikh Jarrah and the attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was what Hamas was originally calling for almost 2 weeks ago, when it was saying enough is enough with the attacks on worshippers. This has got to stop. Has any of that changed?
Unfortunately, you yourself has witnessed this thing. The international community has witnessed this thing, that they are playing with our bloods. Netanyahu, since the 10th of the month of Ramadan, in order to attract the extremist votes to his own government, which he has failed even to form it, he allowed them. By the way, those extremist Zionists, extremist settlers, they belong to some organization by name of Lahava, which is really banned even inside the Israeli government, sorry. So look at it, how he is playing with this blood. He is a real criminal. He is a real a criminal who has committed and committing crimes against humanity. The international community has to put him into ICC. They have to know very well that we are, I will reiterate again and again, we are only defending ourselves. Yes, for concluding the ceasefire, this might alleviate the human situation, the human dire situation and the misery inside Gaza. But I am also calling the international community to implement this ceasefire, to make the Israeli side abide by the conditions. They have to pull out from Al-Aqsa mosque. It is a mosque, it's not a synagogue. It's something relevant, as UNESCO has said explicitly in their own report, official report, that Al-Aqsa Mosque belonged to Muslims. It has nothing relevant to the Jews. That is nothing relevant to clash between religions. But this is something very rational. A church belongs to Christians. Mosque belongs to Muslims. Synagogue belongs to Jews. See, even our second Caliph, Umar radiallahu anh, has prevented himself from saying prayer inside the church of the Dome of Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the time he has opened Jerusalem. Why? Simply because he was expecting that the place where he will be offering prayers, the Muslims will come and build up a mosque. He said, no, I should respect this church. Church is for Christians. He came outside, he offered prayers, and the mosque of Umar till today is outside the church over there. This is how we behave as Palestinians and as Muslims and as Christians. But those Zionist regimes do not understand any language of peace.
Khaled, I'm going to interrupt you because we're joined on the phone. Stay with me. We're joined on the phone from Gaza by Akram Al-Satari, who's a freelance news reporter and translator. Akram, thank you for joining us. Just before we talk, let's go live to the Palestinian Foreign Minister.
And for that reason, we have to work very hard in order to put an end to that occupation. Today's events here in the General Assembly and what has been happening has refocused the attention again on the issue of Palestine. That anything related to the so-called normalization between some Arab countries and Israel does not forgo Palestine and the issue of Palestine and the question of Palestine or the question of Jerusalem. To the contrary, we see today that, the issue of Palestine and Palestinian question, the issue of Jerusalem and the occupation of Jerusalem is the most important issue for all Muslims and Arabs and the world alike. And that if there is an issue that brings Arabs, Muslims, world alike to be united, to work for one particular issue, is about Jerusalem and Palestine. We are proud of that, and we will be working with everybody in order to see the end to occupation, the end to aggression, the end to crimes, and the end to impunity, and the beginning for accountability. We want to see the Palestinian people free and also living in their own independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. We are proud of the work that has been done today, and we have to build on it. We have to move into other dimensions and to see what can we do together in order to accelerate the process and to focus the attention on the work of the Security Council and on other matters in order to see that a negotiated settlement about the Israeli-Palestinian question will be initiated as soon as possible according to the terms, internationally recognized terms of references and international legitimacy.
سيد الوزير باللغة العربية لو سمحت، هل هناك تقدم في المشاورات نحو وقف الأعمال القتالية؟ وهل هناك إطار زمني واضح بالنسبة لكم متى يمكن أن يبدأ هذا الوقف؟ وهل هو مرتبط أيضا بمسألة المعابر إلى غزة؟
خبر أن الساعة 2 فجر صباحا سيبدأ الوقف الإسرائيلي للعملية العسكرية. ولا حاله.
نحن نعتقد بأن المقاومة الشعب الفلسطيني لهذا الاحتلال ولجرائمه وصموده أمام هذه الجرائم وقوف المجتمع الدولي.
So that was I'm going to ask Akram, what is your reaction to today's discussions at the UNGA?
Well, as a matter of fact, the UNGA has been discussing the Palestinian matter like forever. They have been discussing that matter since 1948, like was rightly said by our dear friend who was speaking at the other end. Mm-hmm. They have not been able to finalize a resolution ever that would bring an end to the Palestinian misery. They have not been able to stop the Israeli occupation from continuing the aggression against Jerusalem. They have not been able to stop the Israeli occupation from evicting people from their homes and from their lands. They have not been able to stop the Israeli massacres in 2008, into 2012, and in 2014. And in the meantime, they have failed also miserably to stop the Israeli annexations of the holy site and to stop Israel from making those holy sites a mockery when the Israeli occupation attacks Al-Aqsa, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, and breaks with the stun grenades and with the gas cylinders, with the gas grenades, breaks the ancient windows of that masjid that was, by the way, attacked in 1969 and was burned. And the Israeli occupation also protected the perpetrators of that, and they said the man who did that was insane. The long history of the UN being unable to provide answers to that long conflict makes us all think that they will not be able also to bring an end to this recent round of escalation by the Israeli occupation.
I totally accept what you're saying, and you're 100% correct, of course. The UNGA has passed several resolutions over the years, and in the speeches today, most of the speeches, I should say, these facts were highlighted, and both the President and the General Secretary highlighting that the whole credibility of the United Nations now rests on it actually being able to take action to give the Palestinians their rights. Do you think that there is a possibility, or is it just my naivety in listening to these speeches today, but is there the possibility that there is a change afoot following this latest aggression from Israel? Is there the chance that the international community may begin to move towards what's right, towards creating creating a two-state solution, or at least giving the rights to the Palestinians that they so deserve? Khaled, let's throw that one to you.
Well, let me answer as simple as this. The answer to your question is no. And the justification of that no, which is a very big no, by the way, is that there is a structural flaw with the UN. The fact that there are 5 key members of UN, the permanent member of the UNs, who are part of some conflicts all over the world, any one of those parties can stop any decision that is being made, and then will accordingly stop any future action towards stopping Israel, towards doing justice to the Palestinians, towards stopping any kind of action that is still ongoing. And we have seen in the history, not only with Palestine, but also with Iraq and with Syria and with Yemen.
I'm going to this is an evening of interruptions, Akram. I'm sorry, we just breaking news. The Israeli cabinet has apparently approved a ceasefire. What is your reactions now? This has just been released. The Israeli cabinet has approved a ceasefire. I don't have any details yet. What's your reaction to that?
I have the details. There were communication between Egyptian authorities and the Israeli government from one side, and between the Egyptian broker also and Hamas from the other side, and they were negotiating a deal. According to that deal, they would stop what they called the hostilities between the two sides. Egyptians managed to go back and forth and speak to the different parties. And they were also delegated to do that by the American administration. And finally, the Israeli cabinet is not willing to pay the price of the ceasefire. And this is now the unilateral ceasefire that was accepted by the cabinet is indicative of their failure to bring an end to the ongoing military confrontation, indicative of the failure of their army and intelligence to anticipate the areas where the rockets were being fired from, a failure from their intelligence and army also to defeat the Palestinian resistance in this continuous fighting, despite the fact that they were using this disproportionate fire. They were using that fire and directing it mostly to the Palestinian civilian population, causing that widespread destruction. And eventually, they are the ones now who are declaring the ceasefire. The Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian people are not lifting the white flag, as said in the norms of the war, and now they are failing, and because of that they say we have a unilateral ceasefire. But I think behind that statement there are also some agreements that were made by Egypt. According to those agreements, they will not allow the settlers to enter Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and they will leash them to some extent to avoid any future confrontation. So I think behind that unilateral statement there are some multilateral agreements, including Egypt, including United States, Europe, Hamas, and Egypt.
Can I have your response? Khalid Kadomi, can you hear me? So
Can you hear?
What is your response to the announcement of the ceasefire?
Well, see, as Akram was saying, a unilateral announcement from the Israeli side to the ceasefire, it's implicitly saying the winning of our people, the winning of the resistance. That is one. On the other hand, that means that we are free in our decision to continue our resistance as far as the conditions, the requirements of our people is not implemented, is not accomplished. The Israeli army has to pull out from Al-Aqsa Mosque. The settlers should be away from Al-Aqsa Mosque. The displacement process of our people to target the changing of the demography in favor of Jews in the neighborhood of Al-Quds and in Al-Quds itself, like in what is happening in Sheikh Jarrah, should be stopped over there. The atrocities over our people in Gaza should stop over there. If those requirements will be accomplished, then the resistance will stop its fire, and will continue, of course, with our own resistance against the occupation with different means. But that indicates also that the Israeli side is, to some extent, not able to deal with the current situation. That is a big slam on the face of Netanyahu itself, that he has failed to achieve even security for his own people, for his own society. Because, as I said, in clear point, the time we are saluting our people in Gaza, the time we want to alleviate the suffering from our people in Gaza, the time we want to be in the back of our people in Al-Quds, but on the other hand, the atrocities are still there. The international community are witnessing today, as you've said, in the General Assembly, the speeches and rhetorics are repeated for the last 73 years, and now really solid implementation for those rules and against Israel to push them forward to pay the tax of the occupation. I think that Israeli today announced their own failure to abide by the human situation, humanitarian situation in Palestine and in Gaza itself.
And that humanitarian situation is, of course, dire. Akram, you're in Gaza. Can you tell us just what is the living situation for people on the streets of Gaza today?
I think I am in the position of giving you an account and a description of what is happening in Gaza. I have, in the past 2 days, been visiting the shelters, the different UN school housing around. Every school is housing around 1,000 Palestinians. Whole families moved from their places to those schools in fear of the Israeli ongoing bombardment. Thousands of people are also affected because their work has been disrupted. They are already unemployed and poor, and some of them are casual laborers that work day by day to ensure that they can make some living. Those people are all now in the UN schools. 72,000 people. 72,000 Gazans are now in the different UN schools, around 50 schools throughout the Gaza Strip, and many other people are held captive by the Israeli occupation. When you see a specific area of land, a square of land with around 4 or 5 houses, that is subjected to around 40 airstrikes in 3 or 4 minutes. When you see whole buildings reduced to rubble by the Israeli occupation, when you see cars being targeted, when you see also primary healthcare clinics being targeted. The Ministry of Health announced that at least 21 primary healthcare clinics were out of service because there is an ongoing bombardment. The overall situation in Gaza is there even before this recent round of escalation. Now this escalation adds insult to injury, makes people more vulnerable and makes people more prone to the economic and social and psychological problems. You see adults, I spoke to adults who were unable to sleep at night because they were fearing if they slept they would wake up to the sound of the explosions. I spoke to adults also who were afraid of sleeping day or night because they think they would be targeted anytime. Mothers who would stay fully closed and waiting because they think they might have to flee from their home any time of the day. Children who tell you that they are afraid because of the sound of the explosions ripping the silence in the Gaza Strip. And that was not happening on 1 or 2 or 3 times a day. That was happening tens and hundreds of times a day. And the bombardment never stopped until now. The bombardment never stopped because there was, few minutes ago, there was a bombardment somewhere in Gaza City. So the toll, the psychological toll is massive.
And it looks as
the impact is deep.
It looks as though Netanyahu is trying to get as much bloodshed as he can before he finally does fulfill his ceasefire. Let's hope that the bombs stop raining on Gaza immediately or as soon as, and that the international community begins to take action on what it's been talking about and starts investigating the war crimes that have been committed over the last 10 or 11 days. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here today on The Edge. Thank you. Turkey accuses the international community of turning a blind eye to Israel's aggression over the occupied Palestinian territory, reiterating its strong support for the Palestinian people. Our following infographic explains Turkey's efforts. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has accused Israel of committing war crimes in Gaza as dozens of healthcare facilities have been destroyed by the Israeli bombardments in the besieged Strip.
The Gaza Strip's already feeble health system has been brought to its knees by the 4th Israeli offensive in just over a decade. Hospitals have been overwhelmed with waves of dead and wounded from Israel's brutal bombardment. Many vital medicines are rapidly running out in the tiny blockaded coastal territory, as is fuel to keep electricity running.
In the Gaza Strip, 46% of essential drugs and 33% of essential medical supplies are at zero stock. That's less than 1 month, but it basically means they don't have that. So almost half of essential drugs.
Healthcare facilities are struggling to handle both casualties of war and the everyday needs of Gaza's 2 million people. 2 of Gaza's most prominent doctors, including the deputy head of its coronavirus task force, were killed when their homes were destroyed during barrages. In the midst of a surge in infections, Gaza's only virus testing lab was damaged in an airstrike and has now stopped working.
In the Gaza Strip, 19 health facilities have been damaged, including destruction of the Hala al-Shawa primary healthcare clinic. In the West Bank, 41 health workers have been injured and 21 health vehicles damaged. The severe damage to the roads and infrastructure makes access to many of the hospitals very, very difficult.
Israel has struck hundreds of targets around the tiny Mediterranean coastal strip. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed in airstrikes and more than 1,500 people have been wounded. The bombardment has driven more than 71,000 Gazans, about 3% of the population, from their homes into shelters.
What the occupation is doing in Gaza, including vicious attacks on civilians, deliberate shelling of residential areas and institutions, destruction of infrastructure, as well as the killing of women, elderly and children, is organized state terrorism carried out by the Israeli occupation and war crimes punishable by international law. We will not spare any efforts to bring those responsible in front of international courts.
And joined now live from Istanbul by Ahmed Said, who's an activist in Jerusalem issue, and also from Florida by Bülent Yavuz, who's a political analyst. Gentlemen. Yes. Thank you for joining me today. Ahmed, I wonder if I can come to you first. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So, in just over 3 hours' time, the ceasefire should come into effect, hopefully stopping the bombardments, the aerial attacks on the Gaza Strip. Well, what is your reaction to this?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. And actually, when we heard about these decisions by the by the Egyptian government, when they have this agreement between Hamas in Gaza and the Israeli soldiers, we were expecting this kind of stop the firing since few days, because it was a lot of political governments, especially U.S., when they tried to communicate with the Egyptian government in order to encourage them to stop the fight between Hamas in Gaza and between the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and Israel. So because of that, we were expecting this kind of action, but the reality is we cannot know until when this kind of this agreement will stand, for 24 hours or for 84 hours. Some of the analysts says that they might finish this kind of agreements within 48 hours as top, because everyone is trying to manage himself nowadays, because this fight, it came suddenly without any preparation by both sides, and actually they want to try to find an agreement in the future. But when we look at the situation there today, since the morning up to now, they didn't stop the fire between the both sides. The Israelis, they keep firing rockets to the Palestinians land in Gaza, and at the same time, the resistance in Gaza, they keep firing since the morning up to now. I mean, some of the people, they said there is no 1 minute of stopping the rockets from Gaza to the Israeli land. So all of them, they were doing some kind of, they were trying to reach to some kind of achievement before this stop of the firing, in order to know in the next 24 hours or 48 hours what kind of actions they might do. But what we can see from the reality of what's happening, I think maximum 48 hours, then the fight will come back, because the Israelis will not accept the Palestinian conditions regarding to stop the fire, which is three conditions that they're requesting. The first one, which is stop the attack into Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And the Israeli government will not allow that to happen, because if they allow that to happen, so it will be a bad decisions for Netanyahu and the people, the parliament who is supporting him. They will not accept that. The second decision that the second request from Hamas is the Israelis, they have to stop attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque and storming the compound of Al-Aqsa. And of course, Netanyahu, if he accepts this one, it will be the end of his politics. And the third one, of course, to handle the cost of renovations and rebuilding the houses that they are destroyed in Gaza. And I think Israelis will not accept that those three conditions in any circumstances.
Well, thank you for joining us and giving us that analysis on where we are at the moment. Let's see where it goes, but let's hope that the ceasefire in some shape or form can hold. Well, let's now come to you. The ceasefire declaration, perhaps it hasn't come as a surprise, as there's been rumours of background talks going on for days. And of course, tremendous pressure has been put on Joe Biden to put pressure on to Benjamin Netanyahu to bring things to a halt. And then again, just a few hours ago, the UNGA has been meeting to discuss these issues. So first of all, let's talk about the announcement that's just come out of the Israeli cabinet meeting that there's going to be a ceasefire. What's your reaction to that?
First of all, it's a relief for the people of Palestine and the occupied territories in particular, as well as the folks who live in Israel. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the people who lost their lives, they're mostly civilians. It's maybe 20-to-1 ratio on the last count of Palestinians to the Israelis. But yet again, a loss is so detrimental to all these families. It's a tremendous tragedy. And one of the things that I'd like to highlight is that, of course, ceasefire is wonderful news, and I hope, like everyone else, that it remains sustainable and it doesn't go reverse itself before we know it. But there is an imminent humanitarian emergency issue, especially in Gaza right now, because and I'm getting my numbers, by the way, the numbers that I'll be just talking about from Israeli sources. So from that perspective, it's about 800,000 people are right now in Gaza do not have access to potable water, and there are about 2 million people live in this region. It's very crowded. It's about 13,000 people per square kilometer, and not to mention the COVID epidemic, the COVID and any other diseases that can initiate because of the lack of poor sanitation and potable water.
There we should emphasise that the bombing has opened sewers, so there is wastewater, disgusting sewerage water spilling out onto the streets.
And not only that, and the salination plants have been damaged. This is so critical in the Gaza because Gaza aquifer does not have potable water, so they need purification and desalination, which requires electricity to run. And the damages that the Israelis have done in the last 10 days have been on these plants, and plus there's no power in many of these places. So it could really turn into a tremendous catastrophe unless it is also addressed as quickly as possible. So this is one particular problem. And total damage, the first estimates that I'm seeing reported around $250 million of infrastructure damage. And many families and the greater families, with starting from grandparents down, three generations, are demolished in certain places. There's tragic stories. I'm sure it's going to surface as hours go by, as we know it. So there is a tremendous catastrophe in the occupied lands today. In the U.S., you asked, the sentiment. Sentiment over here is growing by the day, questioning the unconditional support that this country has been giving to Israel over the years. And this is within the public. We can see that, as well as among some of the congressmen and congresswomen in Washington, D.C., and also the senators. And one of the things that people are questioning it is, why is President Biden approved $3.8 billion of aid to Israel without negotiating anything on the ceasefire or anything was happening. And on that, White House is very careful countering these and criticism, and they're emphasizing that there's been a heavy discussion and negotiation behind the scenes, and their style is not to do this up and open in the public. And I'm sure that there have been quite a number of those negotiations, level of negotiations at the background through President Biden's personal envoy that he sent, as well as the local, not the local, but the regional governments such as Egypt and Qatar and so forth. They've been quite proactive in between negotiating between mediating between Hamas and Israeli government. So we don't know the details of that yet.
I want to ask you something. I was listening to the speeches earlier today from the UN General Assembly, and it's almost as if the representative, sorry, I forget her name, who was speaking for the United States, either wasn't aware of what was going on in the Palestinian territories, what caused these bombardments, or she hadn't been listening to the previous speeches, not least from the UNGA president and General Secretary. Because it seemed from the American perspective that all of this just started 11 days ago with rockets being sent by Hamas. But of course, that isn't where this started. This all started long ago, but in recent history with the Sheikh Jarrah evictions, as was highlighted in several of the speeches today, and also the attacks on worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. But it almost seems as though America isn't aware of that. Is that a right perspective?
I think more people are aware of it this time on these incidences that initiated this very last crisis. But I would agree with you that if you go through the entire public population, we have to really ask the public and ask the questions and to get the right answers. But I won't be surprised if the majority of the American public do not have those facts with themselves. But having said that, it's still a tremendous awareness on the Palestinians' issues this time compared to any other time that I've ever seen and observed, for a long time. So to be fair, people are more aware, and social media, of course, is a tremendous tool here that is being used very effectively, and people are following. Those people who are interested to understand and see what's happening are really getting information on their own. Mm-hmm. And I would not underestimate the role of the impact of the Jewish Americans themselves. A lot of people maybe throughout the world might be thinking that they are siding with Israel no matter what. That is not the case. Right. Absolutely not the case. So, and anytime a prominent Jewish American such as Bernie Sanders or anybody in the Jewish American community speaks out on the unfair situation, people pay more attention because of the nature of the the individual who speaks about this. So we see these examples. And that's a positive development in a way. Surely is. And let's remember that there are more Jewish people living in the United States than they live in Israel. Mm-hmm. About 50% of the world Jewish population live in the United States, and only 30% live in Israel, and 20% elsewhere. So American Jewish diaspora is very strong. And also, they're very influential and across the board, anywhere from politics to industry to medicine, etc. So their role is here as a peacemaker is going to become much more crucial between the two societies in Israel.
Let's hope that they speak up more. And one wonders if one of the things that Israel has shot, maybe they've shot themselves in the foot this time, and the world is opening their eyes and wanting to be informed and wanting to see change in Palestine and the Palestinian people getting their rights finally. Let's hope. But Abbas, thank you for joining me today here on The Edge. Thank you. Now, before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story, shared with the hashtag Gaza Under Attack. This is what you've been saying about Gaza under attack on Twitter. IBRAHIM says, pro-Palestinians everywhere, you are important. You are a part of this momentum. We see you, we appreciate you, we value your sacrifices. Your support makes a huge difference. Much love. Fat Al-Riyas says, 1 day old, not named by parents yet, survives an Israeli airstrike to an apartment in the building where the family live. Grandmother is finally revealed to find him alive. And Kubab says the killing is still ongoing. People are still getting killed, ethically cleansed, and homes being stolen. Nothing changed in Palestine. Airstrikes are still ongoing for 10 days. Everyone lost or will lose someone they love. Let's now take a look at our video of the day, which shows the extensive trauma that children in Gaza are experiencing during Israeli airstrikes.
هلا في صوت طيارة خفيشة العبي خفيش 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 خلاص تعال 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 خلاص 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 يا سارة خلاص خلاص يا بابا خلاص. طبعا يا جماعة احنا هيك خلصنا فيديو اليوم لأنه مش حنقدر نكمل معاكم. هاي صوتها هاي صوت طيران. خلاص يا بابا خلاص خلاص تخافيش. طبعا احنا اليوم خلاص بعيد بعيد. طبعا احنا خلصنا هيك خلاص يلا.
provided for mental health in children is often inadequate. And as I say, it's not just Israel and Gaza, but I know that the resources in Gaza and Israel are quite limited. Therefore, it's important in the international community to invest and provide international specialist mental health support to really provide the correct treatments and interventions to these children.
Well, with the agreement of the Israeli cabinet just a little earlier, it looks as though a ceasefire will come into effect about 3 hours from now. Let's hope that this is an end to the bombs raining down on Gaza and hitting innocent people in their homes. Let's hope that after tonight, people can get to sleep at night without the fear of waking up to an explosion. But whether or not this ceasefire holds, we must remember the children, the people of Palestine, who are still traumatized by the events of the last 11 days, indeed of the last 73 years. They still need the help of the world still needs to take action. Well, that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy BOYNS. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.